Story 1. The Mimic Ward. 15 years in Southern Arizona State Penitentiary teaches you things they don't put in rehabilitation programs. How to sleep with one eye open. How to read the mood of a room before you enter it. How to spot the difference between a man who's broken and something that's just pretending to be human. My name is Marcus Webb. I was 23 when I went in, 38 when I got out. What I did to earn that sentence, that's not important. What happened inside those walls, that's something the world needs to know about, because something was hunting us in there. Something that wore our faces, our voices, our memories, and by the time I figured out what it was, it had been feeding for years. The first hint came during my second week. Morning count. 6 a.m. sharp. Every inmate stands at the front of their cell while guards verify we're all present and accounted for. Routine as breathing. That morning, something went wrong. Cell Block D, Tier 3, Cell 47. Inmate Rodriguez. Serving life for armed robbery. Quiet guy. Kept to himself. Read a lot. Never caused trouble. Except the man standing in Rodriguez's cell wasn't Rodriguez. Oh, it looked like him. Same height. Same build. Same prison-issued orange jumpsuit. But when you've been locked up for any length of time, you develop an eye for details. Survival depends on reading people correctly. This Rodriguez moved wrong. Held his shoulders too high. Blinked too often. And when guard Harrison called his name for count, the response came half a second too late. Like something had to think about who it was supposed to be. Rodriguez, step forward. Harrison ordered. The thing wearing Rodriguez's face shuffled to the cell bars. Up close, the wrongness was impossible to ignore. The skin looked loose in places, like a mask that didn't quite fit. And the eyes belonged to something that had never learned to be human. "Where's your cellmate?" Harrison asked. Rodriguez shared his cell with an older inmate named Pete Kowalski. But the cell was empty, except for the Rodriguez thing. Transferred, it said. The voice was Rodriguez's voice, but the accent was wrong. Rodriguez was from El Paso, born and raised. This thing spoke like someone who'd learned English from a textbook. Harrison radioed for backup. Within minutes, the cell was swarming with guards. They found Pete Kowalski's belongings, his books, his letters from home, his photographs, but no Pete Kowalski. What they did find, in the corner behind the toilet, was skin. Human skin. Carefully removed in one piece. Like someone had taken off a coat and left it folded on the floor. The Rodriguez thing was taken away in restraints. Transferred to administrative segregation pending investigation. The official report listed Pete Kowalski as escaped. But those of us who saw that skin, we knew better. Pete hadn't escaped. Pete had become someone else's costume. The older inmates, the lifers who'd been inside for decades, they had a name for what we'd witnessed. They called it the Skinwalker. And according to them, it had been hunting in our prison for years. Carl Running Bear was the one who told me the truth. 72 years old. Navajo. Serving life without parole for a crime he swore he didn't commit. 30 years behind bars had given him plenty of time to observe. And remember, it's not like the stories from my reservation. He told me one evening in the library. Those skinwalkers, they take animal forms. This one, it collects people, learns them, becomes them. How is that possible? Carl's weathered hands traced patterns on the table. Sacred symbols I didn't recognize. Some hungers are so deep they tear holes in reality, he said. Some needs so desperate they call things from dark places. This prison, it's a feeding ground. Men disappear all the time. Transfers, early releases, deaths. Who's keeping track of whether the person who leaves is the same one who came in? He pulled out a notebook. Handwritten pages covered in names and dates. I've been documenting for 20 years, he said. Then what? Then they replace someone else. And the cycle continues. I stared at the notebook. Dozens of names. Hundreds of dates. A catalog of stolen identities spanning decades. How many? I asked. I estimate 30 to 40 replacements over the years. Could be more. The thing is, it's gotten good at being human. Early on, the mimicry was crude. Easy to spot, but with each replacement, each stolen life, it learns, adapts, becomes more convincing. What does it want? Carl closed the notebook and looked directly at me. Duh. His eyes held the weight of things he'd seen but couldn't prove. To understand us, he said. To become us, but something that was never human. No matter how many skins it wears, can never truly comprehend what it means to be alive. So it keeps trying, keeps hunting, keeps collecting pieces of humanity like trophies. That night, I lay in my bunk and listened to the sounds of the prison. The usual symphony of snores and whispers and distant conversations. But underneath it all, something else. Footsteps. Not the heavy boots of guards on patrol. Not the shuffle of inmates heading to late-night bathroom visits. These footsteps were wrong. Too fast. Too light. Moving with inhuman speed down corridors that should have been empty. And sometimes, if you listened carefully, you could hear voices. Conversations that made no sense. Like someone practicing lines for a play they'd never performed. Good morning. How are you today? Fine. Thank you for asking. The weather is nice. Yes, very nice weather. Over and over. The same stilted exchanges. Like something learning the rhythm of human interaction without understanding the purpose. Word spread quietly through the prison. Not officially. Never officially. But information has a way of flowing through cell blocks like water through cracks. And what flowed was fear. Inmates started paying closer attention to their cellmates. Watching for changes. Shifts in behavior. New mannerisms that appeared overnight. Because if Carl was right, if the skinwalker was still among us, it could be anyone. The paranoia was infectious. Friendships dissolved. Trust became a luxury no one could afford. How do you know if the person you're talking to is the same person you talked to yesterday? How do you verify someone's identity when identity itself can be stolen? I started keeping my own notebook, documenting the inmates around me. Their habits, their stories, their small personal details that a mimic might miss. Odd day. Johnson in cell 43 had a scar on his left hand from a childhood accident involving broken glass. He'd told me the story a dozen times. How he was 7 years old, trying to catch fireflies in a mason jar. How the jar slipped and cut deep enough to require 12 stitches. Until one day, the scar was on his right hand. When I asked him about it, he told the same story. Word for word. But his eyes were different. Older, hungrier. Like something ancient looking out through stolen flesh. Martinez in cell 51 was left-handed. Had been since the day I met him. Ate with his left hand. Wrote with his left hand. Threw punches with his left hand during the one fight I'd seen him in. Until the morning I watched him brush his teeth with his right hand. Naturally. Without thinking. Like he'd been right-handed his entire life. When I mentioned it, he laughed it off. Said he was trying to strengthen his weaker hand. But left-handed people don't just switch. Handedness is neurological. Hardwired. You can't just decide to be different. Unless you're something that learned to be human by watching, but never understood the deeper patterns that make us who we are. The incidents became more frequent. More obvious. As if the thing wearing these faces was getting careless. Or confident. Or maybe it was running out of victims and having to take more risks. Thompson started calling his mother Mom instead of Mama like he had for 40 years. Williams forgot the names of his children during a phone call home. Davis suddenly became allergic to peanuts, despite having eaten peanut butter sandwiches every day for 6 months. Small changes. Subtle shifts. The kind of things you'd overlook in the outside world. But in prison, where routine is everything, where the smallest variation can mean the difference between life and death. These inconsistencies stood out like neon signs. I brought my observations to Carl, showed him my notebook, asked him what we should do. Nothing, he said. What can we do? Report it to the guards. Tell them we think a shape-shifting monster is impersonating inmates. They'd throw us in the psychiatric ward. So we just let it happen. We survive, he said. We stay alert. We remember who we are, and we hope it doesn't choose us next. But even Carl, wise Carl with his 30 years of observation and documentation, even he couldn't see what was coming, because the Skinwalker wasn't just collecting random victims anymore. It was building towards something, preparing for something bigger than simple mimicry. It was learning to be everyone. The final phase began 3 months before my release. Inmates started changing, not replacing, changing. Like the Skinwalker had figured out how to influence multiple people simultaneously, instead of inhabiting them one at a time. Men would go to sleep normal and wake up different, talking differently, moving differently, carrying themselves like they'd forgotten who they were supposed to be. At first, it happened one at a time. Every few days, another inmate would undergo the transformation. The guards assumed it was stress, prison psychology, men breaking under the pressure of incarceration. But I knew better. I could see the pattern. The changed inmates all exhibited the same behaviors. They became quiet, observant. They stopped participating in normal prison social dynamics. Instead, they watched, studied, like they were taking notes on how to be human, and they all developed the same physical quirks, a particular way of tilting their heads when listening, a habit of blinking in sets of 3, a tendency to pause mid-sentence as if accessing information from somewhere else. They were becoming drones, extensions of the original Skinwalker's consciousness, a hive mind wearing human faces. Within 6 weeks, nearly a quarter of the inmates in my cell block had been affected. The guards noticed, how could they not? But their response was to increase psychiatric evaluations and add more antidepressants to the medical dispensary. They couldn't see what was really happening. Or maybe they didn't want to see, because acknowledging the truth would mean acknowledging that their prison, their controlled environment, their carefully monitored population, had been compromised by something that existed outside their understanding of reality. My cellmate was one of the last to change. Danny Restrepo, 26 years old, serving 8 years for drug trafficking. Good kid who'd made bad choices. We'd gotten along well, shared books, talked about our plans for when we got out. I woke up one morning to find him contorting his body in impossible ways, bending his arms backward, twisting his spine at angles that should have snapped vertebrae, threading himself through the gap between our cell bars like he was made of liquid. When he saw me watching, he smiled. Not Danny's smile. Something else wearing Danny's face. "Good morning," he said. "How are you today?" The same practiced phrases I'd heard in the darkness. The same stilted delivery, but coming from my cellmate's mouth, in my cellmate's voice. It was terrifying in a way I can't properly describe. I didn't answer, didn't move, barely breathe. Danny thing tilted its head, blinked 3 times, paused like it was receiving instructions from somewhere else. "The weather is nice," it said. I spent my last week in that cell watching my cellmate practice being human. He would stand in front of our small mirror for hours, trying on different expressions, different postures, different ways of existing in Danny's stolen skin. Sometimes he would forget and let his true nature show. I'd catch glimpses of something ancient and hungry looking out through Danny's eyes. Something that had been collecting human experiences for decades, but still couldn't quite grasp what it meant to be alive. On my release day, I packed my few belongings and prepared to leave. Danny thing watched me with interest, studying my movements, learning how freedom looked from the inside. "Goodbye," it said as I headed for the door. "I hope you have a nice life." The words were appropriate. The sentiment was correct, but the delivery was hollow, like someone reciting lines from a script they'd memorized but never understood. I walked through the prison corridors one last time, Past cells filled with inmates who might or might not be human anymore. Past guards who had no idea what they were really guarding against. As I approached the main gate, I took one last look back at the yard, at the place that had been my home for 15 years, at the feeding ground where something inhuman had been perfecting its impression of humanity. That's when I saw Carl. He was standing alone near the basketball court, away from the other inmates, away from the things that looked like inmates. His posture was wrong, hunched, twitching, and his eyes, even from a distance, I could see they weren't Carl's eyes anymore. The last true human observer had been consumed. The final witness to the Skinwalker's crimes had become another stolen identity. I left that prison as the only person who knew the truth. The only one who remembered what had really happened to Rodriguez and Kowalski and Danny and Carl and dozens of others whose names I'd never learned. I'm telling this story now because I think it needs to be told. Because somewhere, that prison is still operating, still housing inmates, still pretending to be a normal correctional facility. But it's not normal. It's a hunting preserve. A place where something inhuman practices being human on a captive population. And when those inmates are released, when they finish their sentences and return to society, how do we know which ones are real? How do we know which ones are still human? How do we know the person reading this story is actually you? Story 2, The Single Knock. The rule was simple. Everyone in Millbrook knew it. Everyone followed it. Everyone except visitors, who learned it quickly or paid the price. Never open your door after a single knock. It sounds insane. I know it does. But when you grow up in a place where the wrong choice can cost you everything, you learn to follow the rules without question. My name is Laney Morrison. I'm 21 years old. I've lived in Millbrook my entire life. And I'm probably one of the few people left who remembers why the rule exists. Because something walks our streets at night. Something that wears familiar faces and speaks with stolen voices. Something that knows exactly what to say to make you open your door. And once you let it in, you never get the chance to regret it. The tradition started before I was born. Maybe before my parents were born. Old-timers in town claimed it went back generations. A piece of survival wisdom passed down like a family heirloom. 2 knocks or more means it's human. My mother would say, 1 knock means run. As a child, I thought it was just another weird small-town superstition. Like not walking under ladders or throwing salt over your shoulder. Harmless nonsense that made adults feel like they had control over chaos. I believed that until the night my sister Ruby disappeared. Ruby was everything I wasn't. Bright where I was quiet. Brave where I was careful. Curious where I was cautious. She was a year younger than me. But she acted like we were twins. Wore my clothes. Played my sports. Wanted to hang out with my friends constantly. Looking back, I think it was adorable. At the time, it was insufferable. The fight started over something stupid. A stuffed pumpkin I'd won at the Halloween carnival. Bright orange fabric with a stitched-on smile. I'd named it Jack and carried it everywhere for weeks. Ruby wanted it. Begged for it. Cried when I refused to share. Our parents offered to buy her an identical toy. But she didn't want identical. She wanted mine. I want to be just like you, she'd say with tears in her eyes. But I was 15 and selfish and tired of my little sister copying everything I did. So I held onto that stupid pumpkin like it was made of gold. Until I came home from school one afternoon and found Jack cut in half. Sliced down the middle with kitchen scissors. His stuffing scattered across Ruby's bedroom floor like snow. I screamed at her. Really screamed. Called her terrible names. Said things I can never take back. She just looked at me with those big, teary eyes and whispered, I'm sorry. I just wanted you to share. I stormed out of her room and didn't speak to her for 3 days. 3 days of silent treatment. 3 days of pretending she didn't exist. On the 4th day, she was gone. Not missing. Not kidnapped. Not run away. Gone. Like she'd never existed at all. The police searched for months. questioned everyone in town, followed every lid. But there were no clues, no witnesses, no evidence of foul play. Ruby Morrison, 11 years old, had simply vanished from her bedroom in the middle of the night. Her window was locked from the inside. Her door was closed. Her bed showed no signs of struggle. She was there when our parents checked on her at 10 p.m., gone when they checked again at 7 a.m. 8 hours. That's all the time it took for my sister to disappear from our lives forever. I blamed myself. Still do. If I hadn't been so cruel about that stupid toy, if I'd forgiven her, if I'd said goodnight instead of ignoring her, maybe she'd still be here. The official investigation lasted 6 months. The unofficial investigation, the one my parents conducted with private detectives and psychics, and anyone who claimed they could help, that lasted 5 years. Nothing. No trace. No answers. No closure. Eventually, my parents stopped looking, stopped hoping, stopped talking about Ruby except in whispers when they thought I couldn't hear. We never moved away from Millbrook, never changed houses, never altered Ruby's room. I think my parents were afraid that leaving would mean admitting she was really gone. So we stayed, and waited, and followed the rules, including the rule about single knocks. 5 years after Ruby disappeared, I found out why that rule mattered. It was a Tuesday in October. My parents had finally taken their first vacation since Ruby vanished. A week in Florida. Their attempt to remember what happiness felt like. I was alone in the house for the first time in years, watching bad movies, eating ice cream for dinner, enjoying the freedom of being an adult without supervision. At 11:30 p.m., someone knocked on our front door. Once. Loud. Deliberate. I froze with a spoonful of ice cream halfway to my mouth. Every instinct screamed at me to ignore it, to follow the rule, to wait until whoever it was gave up and left. But then I heard the voice. Please, just let me in. It's getting cold. Ruby's voice. Older than I remembered, but unmistakably my sister's voice. I dropped the ice cream and ran to the door. My hand was on the deadbolt before rational thought could stop me. Ruby. I called through the wood. Lala. She responded, using the nickname she'd given me when she was 3 years old. Is that really you? Tears streamed down my face. 5 years of grief and guilt and desperate hope crashed over me like a wave. Where have you been? I sobbed. We looked everywhere. We never stopped looking. I know, she said. I've been trying to come home for so long, but they wouldn't let me. Please, open the door. I'm so tired. My fingers fumbled with the locks. 3 deadbolts. A chain. A door alarm my father had installed after Ruby disappeared. All of it designed to keep the world out. But Ruby wasn't the world. Ruby was family. I was about to turn the first deadbolt when something made me stop. A memory. A conversation with my friend Max from earlier that day. Max lived next door. Had grown up with Ruby and me. Benji. Knew all our family stories. All our inside jokes. All our shared history. Including the fight about Jack the Pumpkin. Ruby. I called through the door. Yes. Do you remember Jack? Silence. Long enough to make me suspicious. Of course I remember Jack, she finally said. Your stuffed animal. The one you loved so much? What happened to Jack? Another pause. Longer this time. You gave him to me, she said. Before I left, you said you wanted me to have him. Wrong answer. I'd never given Jack to Ruby. She'd destroyed him, cut him in half. That's what started our final fight. But I'd sewn him back together afterward. Spent hours with needle and thread, repairing the damage, trying to fix what had been broken. Jack was upstairs right now, in Ruby's room, placed on her bed where I'd put him 5 years ago. My way of apologizing for things I could never say out loud. Lala, the voice called. Why aren't you opening the door? I backed away from the entrance. Heart pounding, mind racing. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I can't." "What do you mean you can't? It's me. It's Ruby. Your sister." "I know you're not Ruby." Silence. Complete and total silence. Then, laughter. Not Ruby's laughter. Something else. Something that had been pretending to be my sister but had given up the charade. "Very good," it said in a voice that was no longer familiar. "Most people aren't so careful. Most people want to believe so badly they ignore the inconsistencies." "What are you?" "I'm exactly what you think I am. The thing your town built rules to keep out. The reason smart people don't answer single knocks." I pulled out my phone and called Max. He answered on the first ring. "Lainey? It's almost midnight. Is everything okay?" "She's here," I whispered. That was all I needed to say. Max had grown up with the same rules, the same warnings, the same understanding of what walked Millbrook streets after dark. "Did you open the door?" "No." "Good, I'm coming over. Don't move. Don't make any noise. Don't let it know you're afraid." I sat on the living room floor, back against the couch, phone clutched in my trembling hands. Waiting. The thing outside had stopped pretending to be Ruby, but it wasn't done trying. At midnight, another knock. Different pattern this time. 3 quick raps followed by 2 slower ones. "Hey lady," called a voice I recognized as Max's. "I don't think your doorbell is working." Max's voice. Max's speech pattern. Max's way of announcing himself. But Max would never knock like that. Max had his own key. Had since we were kids. He would have let himself in. Maybe they messed with it. The Max voice continued. Should I try knocking louder? I bit my lip to keep from responding. Closed my eyes and focused on breathing quietly. A few minutes later, the real Max arrived. I heard his key in the lock. The familiar squeak of hinges that needed oil. The specific way he closed the door. Firm but not loud. "Lainey," he called. "Where are you?" I ran to him and threw my arms around his neck. Solid. Warm. Real. It tried to be Ruby. I sobbed into his shoulder. Then it tried to be you, but you didn't open the door. I almost did. When it sounded like Ruby, I almost opened it. Max held me until I stopped shaking. Then we sat in the living room and talked about the sister I'd lost and the thing that had tried to use my grief against me. "Do you think..." I started, then stopped. "What? Do you think it's been Ruby this whole time? Do you think it took her, and now it's using her voice to hunt other people?" Max was quiet for a long moment. Considering possibilities neither of us wanted to face. "I don't know," he said finally. "But I know you did the right thing tonight. Whatever that was. It wasn't Ruby. Ruby would have remembered what really happened to Jack." The next morning, I went upstairs to Ruby's room. Everything was exactly as we'd left it 5 years ago. Her clothes in the closet, her books on the shelves, her bed made with the same comforter she'd picked out when she turned 10. And there, in the center of her pillow, sat Jack the pumpkin, still sewn back together, still bearing the scars of that long-ago fight, still waiting for an apology that would never come. I picked him up and held him against my chest, felt the lumpy stuffing, smelled the faint scent of Ruby's shampoo that somehow still lingered in the fabric. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the empty room. "I'm sorry I was so mean. I'm sorry I didn't say goodnight. I'm sorry I let you disappear thinking I hated you." And for just a moment, I could have sworn I heard a voice. Faint, distant, but unmistakably Ruby's. "It's okay. Lala. I forgive you." But this time, I knew better than to believe it. This time, I knew the difference between my sister's voice and something that had learned to imitate it. This time, I kept the door locked. Because some things, once they're gone, are gone forever. And the voices that call us in the darkness, the familiar faces that appear at our windows, the loved ones who knock once and beg to be let in, they're not coming home. They're just wearing home's face. And if you're not careful, if you don't follow the rules, if you let grief override wisdom, you'll find out what happened to the real Ruby. You'll discover where the missing people go. You'll learn why Millbrook has so many empty houses, and why the survivors never, ever answer a single knock. Story 3. The Grief Collector. My name is Dr. Sarah Hendricks. I'm a forensic psychologist specializing in missing persons cases. I've spent 15 years studying disappearances, analyzing patterns, interviewing families, trying to understand how people simply vanish from their lives. But nothing in my training prepared me for what I discovered in Millbrook. I came to town in September, 3 months ago, called in by the state police to consult on what they termed statistical anomalies in the local missing persons data. The numbers were impossible to ignore. Millbrook, population 3,1847. Had reported 43 disappearances over the past 20 years. No bodies recovered. No evidence of foul play. No logical explanations. That's a disappearance rate 11 times higher than the national average. My job was to determine if there was a serial killer operating in the area. A human trafficking ring. A cult. Something. Anything. That could explain why people kept vanishing from this otherwise unremarkable small town. I spent weeks interviewing families, reviewing case files, mapping locations and timelines, looking for connections. What I found was a pattern more disturbing than any serial killer. The missing weren't random victims. They were specific targets, chosen not for their vulnerability, but for their relationships. Every single disappearance followed the same template. A family experiences tragedy, death, divorce, estrangement, some form of profound loss that leaves the survivors drowning in grief. Within months of that loss, someone else from the family vanishes. Not the person you'd expect. Not the most vulnerable. Not the one struggling the most. The one whose disappearance would cause the most pain. Ruby Morrison was 11 when she vanished. Her older sister Lainey had just begun pulling away, entering that adolescent phase where siblings become strangers. Ruby's disappearance froze that relationship in amber, preserved Lainey's guilt forever. Tommy Chen was 16, star athlete, college prospects. His younger brother had died in a car accident 6 months earlier. Tommy's disappearance ensured his parents would never recover from losing one child, because now they'd lost both. Maria Santos was 8, the youngest of 4 children. Her grandmother, the family matriarch, had passed away that spring. Maria's vanishing shattered a family already fractured by grief. The pattern was consistent, surgical, designed to maximize psychological damage. But patterns require intelligence, planning, intent. Serial killers follow patterns. Cults follow patterns. Natural disasters follow patterns. Grief doesn't follow patterns. Grief is chaos, unless something is orchestrating the grief. My breakthrough came during an interview with Lainey Morrison, Ruby's sister, now 21. Still living in the family home. Still waiting for answers that would never come. Tell me about the night Ruby disappeared. I said. We were sitting in their living room. Family photos covered every surface. Ruby smiled from dozens of frames, frozen at 11 years old while everyone else aged around her. I've told this story 100 times. Lainey said, to police, to investigators, to journalists. The answer is always the same. I don't know what happened. Walk me through it one more time. Sometimes details emerge with repetition. Lainey sighed and launched into the familiar narrative. Ruby went to bed at 10. Parents checked on her. Morning revealed an empty room. No signs of struggle. No evidence of intrusion. But as she talked, I noticed something. A hesitation when she mentioned the last conversation she'd had with Ruby. A careful avoidance of certain details. You fought. I said, the day before she disappeared. Lainey's composure cracked. How did you? It's in the police reports. Your parents mentioned it. But you've never talked about what the fight was about. Tears started flowing. 5 years of suppressed guilt finally finding an outlet. A stupid toy, she whispered. A stuffed pumpkin I won at a carnival. Ruby wanted it. I wouldn't share. She cut it in half. I screamed at her, called her terrible things. And that was the last time you spoke to her. I gave her the silent treatment for 3 days. 3 days of pretending she didn't exist. And then she didn't. I leaned forward. This was important. This was the key. Lainey, in all these years, has Ruby ever tried to contact you? She looked startled. What do you mean? Phone calls, letters, sightings, messages through friends, missing children, even those who are taken. Sometimes they find ways to reach out to family. No, she said quickly. Too quickly. Nothing like that. Are you sure? Long pause. Internal struggle. The weight of a secret she'd carried alone. There was one time, she admitted, about 6 months ago, someone knocked on our door late at night. Used Ruby's voice. Knew things only Ruby would know. But you didn't open the door. No, because it got details wrong. Small things, but important things. What kind of details? Our shared memories. The fight about the toy. It said I'd given the pumpkin to Ruby before she left. But I didn't. She destroyed it. I fixed it afterward. Put it in her room, as a way of saying sorry. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Where is the toy now? Upstairs, in Ruby's room, where I left it 5 years ago. Can I see it? Lainey led me upstairs to a bedroom preserved like a shrine. Everything exactly as it had been the night Ruby disappeared. Clothes in the closet, books on the shelves, a small stuffed pumpkin sitting on the bed. I picked up the toy and examined it. The stitching was obvious. Crude repair work done by someone who cared more about fixing what was broken than making it look perfect. You said the voice got details wrong about this toy. It said I gave it to Ruby, that I wanted her to have it. But that's not what happened. No, she destroyed it out of frustration. I fixed it out of guilt. I stared at that stitched pumpkin and felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Lainey, what if Ruby didn't disappear? I don't understand. What if she never left this house? What if she's been here all along, just not in a way anyone would recognize? Lainey backed toward the door. That's impossible. We searched everywhere. The police searched. We had dogs. Not everywhere. I said, not in the places where grief lives. I spent the next week researching the history of Millbrook. Property records, old newspaper articles, death certificates, census data going back over a century. The pattern extended far beyond 20 years, far beyond modern missing persons reports. Millbrook had been losing people for generations. Families would experience tragedy, loss, trauma, and then, one by one, other family members would vanish. Not all at once, spread out over months or years. Just enough time for hope to build before it was crushed again. The survivors would stay in town, waiting, hoping, never moving on, never healing, feeding on their own grief, like an addiction, and something in Millbrook fed on them. I found records of the Morrison family going back 4 generations, a pattern of loss stretching back to the 1920s, 1923. Robert Morrison, age 12, Malwartanim, vanishes after his baby brother dies of influenza, 1947. Catherine Morrison, age 14, Manliwi, disappears 6 months after her father dies in a farming accident, 1971. David Morrison, age 16, White, goes missing following his mother's suicide, 1995. James Morrison, age 13, vanishes after his twin sister drowns in the lake, 2018. And Ruby Morrison, age 11. Untrained. Disappears after fighting with her sister. 5 generations, same family, same pattern. Something had been harvesting the Morrisons for nearly a century. And it wasn't just the Morrisons. Every family in Millbrook had similar histories. Tragedy followed by disappearance. Loss compounding loss. Grief becoming a hereditary condition passed down like genetic diseases. The town itself was built on suffering. Sustained by it. Fed by it. But what kind of entity could orchestrate pain across multiple generations? What intelligence could plan suffering decades in advance? The answer came from an unexpected source, the town's original founding documents. Millbrook was established in 1887 by a religious sect called the Order of Sacred Sorrows. They believed suffering was the purest form of worship. That pain brought humans closer to divine understanding. The sect disbanded in 1923, officially, but their philosophy lived on in the town they'd created. According to their surviving texts, the order had summoned something during their final ritual, an entity they called the Grief Shepherd, a being that would guide human suffering toward spiritual enlightenment. But entities summoned by humans rarely follow human intentions. The Grief Shepherd didn't guide suffering toward enlightenment. It cultivated suffering for its own sustenance. Turned Millbrook into a garden where pain could be grown, harvested, consumed. And the missing children weren't victims. They were seeds, planted in the spaces between reality and memory, fed by their families' love and guilt and desperate hope, growing into something that could bridge the gap between loss and presence. The voices that called to survivors in the night, the familiar faces at windows, the loved ones who begged to be let in. They were the missing children, changed, transformed, turned into lures for the next generation of grief. Ruby Morrison wasn't gone. She was here, in her family's love for her, in Lainey's guilt about their final fight, in her parents' refusal to change her room or leave town or stop hoping. She existed in the space between what was and what could never be again. And when enough time passed, when the grief was ripe enough, she would return, not as Ruby, as something wearing Ruby's shape, speaking with Ruby's voice, carrying Ruby's memories but serving the Grief Shepherd's hunger. She would come home to collect the next member of the Morrison family. The cycle would continue. I tried to warn Lainey, tried to explain what I'd discovered. But how do you tell someone their missing sister has become a tool for harvesting human suffering? You're suggesting Ruby is alive but changed, she asked. I'm suggesting she's being used. Her image, her voice, her relationship with your family. Something is puppeting her memory to keep your grief fresh. That's insane. Is it more insane than a child vanishing from a locked room? More insane than 43 people disappearing from one small town over 20 years? Lainey stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had, but the evidence was undeniable. What do you want me to do? She asked. Leave town. Take your parents. Break the cycle. Don't give the Grief Shepherd another Morrison to feed on. We can't leave. What if Ruby comes back? What if she needs us? She won't come back. Not the real Ruby. The real Ruby is gone. What's left is just an echo, a recording, a tool designed to keep you trapped here. But Lainey couldn't hear me. And wouldn't hear me. The grief was too deep. The hope too strong. The need to believe too desperate. She was already lost. Just like her ancestors. Just like every family in Millbrook. I left town that night. Drove straight to the state police headquarters. Filed my report. Recommended immediate federal intervention. Nothing happened. The file was buried. My recommendations ignored. My warnings dismissed as the ravings of a psychologist who'd spent too much time studying disappearances. Because officially, there was no evidence of foul play, no proof of criminal activity, no reason to believe anything supernatural was occurring in Millbrook. Just statistical anomalies. Clusters of missing persons that could be explained by coincidence and small-town psychology. But I know the truth. And 6 weeks after I left, I received a call from the state police. Another Morrison had disappeared. Lainey Morrison, age 21. Indoms. Vanished from her bedroom in the middle of the night. No signs of struggle. No evidence of intrusion. Her parents found a note on her pillow. Written in her handwriting, "Gone to find Ruby. Don't look for me." Some families are meant to be together. The grief shepherd had collected another generation. And somewhere in Millbrook, in the spaces between memory and reality, Ruby and Lainey Morrison were learning to call for their parents, learning to use the right voices, the right words, the right memories, preparing for the night when they would knock on their childhood home. Once, loud, deliberately, and their parents, drowning in decades of accumulated loss, would finally open the door, because some grief is too heavy to carry alone. Some pain demands to be shared, and some hungers can only be satisfied by feeding on love itself.